inflationary introduction. Candy, thank you. And I was looking at the program, and it says I'm down for a keynote address, even though it's after 9 o'clock at night. That is an ominous kind of thought. And I'm giving a little shorter talks anyway, and I'll just tell you why. Candy made mention of the fact I have a variety of interests. I've been heavily involved in healthcare. Back in the days when I had a full head of hair and rugged good looks, I was director of the Gray Panthers at home and been very involved in Medicare and the like. And so recently I was home describing some of the changes that we're seeing in healthcare. And when I was done, all the seniors came running up and said, "Ron, you're just a brilliant speaker. What a great speech. We want the press to write up all your remarks. You've been such a brilliant speaker." They just went on and on. I was so great, the press ought to write it up. I knew that I had not said anything that was any great shakes, but they wanted in the press. So finally I said, folks, maybe the press will write up what I have to say someday. You know, they'll write up my remarks posthumously. And a really sweet senior citizen jumps right up and said, "Oh boy, Ron, with you, I hope that's really, really soon." So I'm going to give you a short talk, even though I'm down for a keynote address. And first of all, I want to say that as somebody who kind of feels like I've been a member of the Fred Caucus all these years, what an appropriate thing to see Fred recognized this way. Let's give him another round of applause for his exceptional work. The only other point I want to make in terms of getting started is that because I was late, I wanted to bring you, right hot off the presses, the latest trade news. And I'm sure this is going to be important to Walmart folks and others interested in textiles. But USTR just put forward a new short supply list. In addition to man-made fiber, the list will now include sanity, something that, as you know, has been in sort of short supply here in Washington. We kind of thought it was implied when the yarn forward rule was proposed and the government shut down. Now it is clear. So in addition to the valuable contribution that USTR has made for purposes of tonight and adding sanity to the short supply list, the fact that the National Foreign Trade Council is going to turn 100 is also impressive news. I don't have to tell you that the organization has consistently been ahead of its time. It wasn't until 1947 when GATT was finally achieved and its sensible principle of non-discrimination was realized that we really saw how important these principles were going to be in terms of trade and particularly helping to shrink global poverty as our world's economy grew. These principles have in effect been firewalls. They've been important firewalls against protectionist instincts that certainly take root during times of economic turmoil. And today, these rules, coupled with advances in technology, enable even the smallest businesses to compete across these world markets. And I think it's important to note that NFTC was ahead of its time in terms of working on those causes and why this celebration of the upcoming birthday is so significant. But it's not just some of the trade policies that NFTC promotes that contributes to this extraordinary global economic growth. It's also been the organization's advocacy for a tax code that encourages domestic innovation and global competitiveness, that will help our country create more high-skill, high-wage jobs. And as part of that agenda, there is something of an acronym-rich trade agenda coming up, and I want to just tick off a few of what those are with respect to what's ahead and priorities for the Obama administration. Candy made mention of the efforts to complete TPP negotiations. Our ambassadors are making headway on TISA, TTIP, ITA2, and a Bali package as well. The Congress is working to rewrite TPA in the tax code, and then there are some important programs that have to be renewed as well: TAA, AGOA, and GSP. So set aside the acronyms for a moment and just operate under the premise that that is an active agenda. And fortunately, we will have NFTC playing an active role in helping to shape the outcome of those efforts so that our businesses and our workers on which they rely can compete. And I want to use this word specifically, win, because that word is going to be part of what I'm going to try to articulate in terms of trade policy for the future, because winning is what we as Americans always come back to. The goal of government is to provide opportunities for our people to pursue better living standards. And our goal, the goal of every generation, and by the way, my wife and I, we are older parents. We have 3 children under 6 at this point. Pictures available on my iPhone after the meeting. What every generation wants for those coming up is we want to be able to expand the winner's circle. We want to be able to expand the circle of Americans who benefit from pro-growth economic policies, of which global trade is surely part of that agenda. Now, like most of you, I know that breaking down barriers to trade and developing a more competitive tax code are ways that enable workers and businesses to reach the winner's circle and succeed in that competitive global economy. But we also know that there are Americans who are hurting as a result of unfair trade practices that harm their businesses, threaten their jobs, and cast a cloud over their futures. I can see it in my home state, where highly skilled workers at SolarWorld have lost jobs due to China's dumping. The trading system has let down workers in Oregon's paper and softwood lumber mills and those who used to produce DRAM semiconductors. Laid off workers from those factories like these say, look, we need programs like trade adjustment assistance because we've got to find some lifeline, some kind of lifeline to be in a position to start again as they move out in the marketplace. But I'll also tell you, even in a state like mine, where 1 out of 6 jobs depends on international trade, and the trade jobs pay better than do the non-trade jobs, even in my home state, at a town hall meeting, I have one in all my counties, folks come and question my support of some of these free trade agreements. And I will tell you, it's a good question, and it's an important question, and it's one we need to have a better response to in the days ahead. I can defend that record, the record of supporting expansionist trade policies when the nation's trade remedy laws are followed and enforced, and when there is a strong safety net for workers who are harmed by surging imports. A safety net that not only catches displaced workers, but provides workers and firms with a springboard, almost kind of a trampoline that allows them to move on to yet additional opportunities in our private economy. I can tout a trade record of being there for every major market opening agreement when I see the thousands of workers, farmers, and innovators who are growing, creating, and adding value to things and sending those goods and services overseas. Oregon workers at Intel and Google, at Oracle and Nike, the vintners of the Willamette Valley, and farmers around the state all rely on a rules-based trading system in the efforts to reduce barriers to their products. So when I'm at a town hall meeting and I'm about to get my head handed to me having voted for trade agreements, I say, look, you bet I want to do everything I can to grow things in Oregon, make things in Oregon, add value to them in Oregon, and then ship them somewhere. The best way to be able to do that and expand the global economy and expand the winner's circle is to make sure our rules-based trading system applies. And that's, in effect, why in the consideration of any trade-related legislation, I think we've got to send that message to members of Congress and our trading partners that those commitments, those pledges, are going to be honored. So as the administration and the Congress approach critical junctures in trade, let's talk about how we can expand the winner's circle so that more workers gain and fewer businesses lose as a result of decisions made in the United States Congress. A new trade promotion authority framework is one specific opportunity. If the goal of TPA renewal is to establish trade objectives that enable more people to win from trade, then the process of its renewal, as this organization has made clear over the years, can benefit from broad input. Our economy is quite different from that of the economy of 2002 when TPA was last written. And there are new opportunities and challenges related to international trade and investment that I think can be huge winners for American workers and American families. For example, today the internet represents the shipping lane of the 21st century for goods and services. And juxtapose what that means compared to what, say, the Senate Finance Committee was looking at not particularly long ago. And Fred has sat in those hearing rooms and sat on those panels where the talk was literally about moving big, bulky, objects from point A to point B. It was all about the physical movement of goods and services. And the digital economy is quite different. Bits and bytes are going to govern a lot of those judgments, and right now the trade rules don't neatly apply to the digital economy. And they don't apply despite the fact that there is a growing number of protectionist practices that we're faced with overseas and barriers popping up. By the way, the most recent WTO rules were written before the internet. It's time for the digital economy also to be brought within the winner's circle by keeping data flows open. By keeping data flows, open. And I was going to kind of do a little teasing for, I guess, Microsoft folks and Citibank folks here who I know are just thrilled about all the NSA policies, and that was a joke. But we've got to keep these data flows, open and ensure that foreign markets aren't more legally hazardous than the United States. Other 21st century challenges include forced localization, currency manipulation, state-owned enterprises, all of which are major impediments to innovation and competition. TPA that relates to the challenges of today has to address these concerns, and its renewal must be informed by that which enabled the unprecedented support for trade accords with Peru and Colombia, Korea, and Panama. What's clear and exciting to me is that there are new constituencies new constituencies that can be brought in to this cause of advocating for these agreements. Last year, when the Netroots successfully organized to block IP legislation in the Congress and the ACTA treaty in the EU, it was a wake-up call because people saw that there were going to be a whole lot of new stakeholders in the debate, stakeholders with ideas, stakeholders who are committed to innovation and economic growth. TPA can draw upon the lessons of these experiences and address the legitimate criticism about the way policy gets formulated. And by that, I mean ensuring that the government cannot shut out valuable people and perspectives just because they aren't well connected or just because they don't serve as a lobbyist. We can broaden the participation in the debate about trade policies and improve the understanding of them without blowing up a rules-based system that has been so important. It just means we're going to have to be a little better at listening, and we're going to have to be a little more creative, and we're going to have to be open-minded to some people who haven't been part of these debates in the past. And I think we're up to it, and I'll really close by saying that I think the agenda to expand the winner's circle also has to include measures that plug the holes in laws and practices that are intended to combat unfair trade and respond to its practices. The Baucus-Hatch Trade Facilitation and Enforcement Act is, in my view, a very good place to start. In a nutshell, this is a proposal that's going to get customs to do its job in facilitating trade and enforcing the trade remedy laws. But we ought to approach this with, clear eyes. There are going to be firms and workers that, through no fault of their own, lose out because of foreign imports. These are folks that deserve a springboard just as that preceded them and which has existed since President Kennedy. It's my view that the debate about trade policy should go hand in glove with other economic choices. Trade is just one tactic of a pro-growth strategy, and another key component of that must include fundamental tax reform. And it probably would be like putting you through root canal work, late in the evening to get into all of the nuances, about tax reform. But suffice it to say, a fundamental set of changes in this dysfunctional, anti-growth, anti-innovation tax code we have is absolutely key to lifting the middle class and ensuring our people can compete for business in foreign markets. Right now, the code is riddled with special interest junk that prevents pretty much everybody, but especially the middle class, from enjoying the benefits of competitive tax rates and a level playing field. Good tax policy shouldn't pick, nor should it alone create winners and losers. Unfortunately, the current tax code fails to meet even that minimum standard. Over the last quarter century, the well-connected have in effect drawn a special winner's circle around themselves. It's my view that the Congress ought to redraw and broaden that circle to include all Americans. That will be a bedrock principle of how I approach, tax reform, one that gives all Americans the opportunity to get ahead and not one that reinforces the biases and favoritism that, in effect, chokes off so much real opportunity for economic growth today. If firms expect R&D subsidies and the strength of the American government to protect their IP, they shouldn't expect the tax system to allow them to move the IP overseas in order to reduce their taxes. If firms expect the benefits of transparency and well-regulated capital markets, if they expect a developed judicial system that enforces contracts and the rule of law, if they expect a government that promotes competition, they expect the government to negotiate and enforce international accords, we need to recognize that everybody is going to have to pay their fair share of taxes to the country that consistently delivers on those expectations. And make no mistake about it, people who are successful today are going to have every opportunity to be successful in the days ahead. This is an agenda that's going to give everybody in America the opportunity to be successful. And it's going to be especially important to make certain that as we pursue these efforts, that we also work closely with the OECD efforts to address base erosion and to make sure that there is no way that these discussions in effect can serve as a stalking horse to discriminate against successful American companies. At this hour, the best two words you can hear are "in conclusion." What endures about our country, in my view, is we've had a consensus that we are going to focus on trying to be that special place in the small L League of Nations. Repeat, to lead. And despite this cacophony of noise that exists right now, we are the global leader. We are the go-to country with respect to trade and the economy. You see that in Geneva, you see it in the Asia Pacific, you see it in Europe, you see it around the world. But let's just remember that we do not achieve the objectives of trade by osmosis. We achieve them because we have worked so hard for a rules-based trading system, one that I think we can build on, that's going to work for our country, the most powerful country on the planet, and arguably is going to be a lot more important for some of our less developed trading partners. That's why we're not, for example, going to give up on the WTO and all that we can achieve in that forum. So let's now, particularly with the leadership of this great organization and the inimitable Fred Caucus that exists here, and with friends on the Hill, to take that rules-based system, make the case that it probably is the single most important contributor to expanding the global winners circle, and I think that's a trade agenda that very much fits how this great organization has approached the challenges for decades and decades. And I want you to know I'll do everything I can to make our government the best possible partner with you as we pursue that program in the days ahead. Thanks for having me.